Well, good morning and welcome. I guess it's almost noon. Welcome to another session for Iowa Ideas. This is our ninth year of Iowa Ideas. It's an event that explores topics that are important to Iowans. And we're excited for this 2 days and stay with us. There is still a keynote address later on today and some panels coming up yet. So it's been a good day. I've been able to catch a lot of the sessions. The Gazette wants to sponsor or give a special thanks to the sponsor ITC Midwest. It's been a good presenting sponsor for Iowa Ideas, and we're grateful for that support. It helps keeps this at a high level, and it also makes this conference free. Good price. Today, we're going to be discussing a couple of things. We're going to be discussing technology and conservation in agriculture. It's the second ag session that I've been able to be a part of today. The first one this morning on alternative crops touched a little bit on some of the things we're going to talk about today. My name is Lyle Muller. I'm a board member of Investigate Midwest. Investigate Midwest is a nonprofit news organization that does in-depth reporting on ag issues. It has an Iowa Watch newsroom in which we take a look at what's going on in Iowa and how it correlates with what's going on in the Midwest. And also, regarding the Gazette, I'm its former editor. So I'm glad to be back with the Gazette. We have three great panelists today. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves and just say a few things about yourself that are pertinent to our topic today, and then we will get into it. And I'll start with Amber, Joe, and then Brad.
Great. Lyle, thank you so much for having me here today. It's really exciting to get a talk about ideas to move Iowa forward. So it's great to be here and be part of this conversation. My name's Amber Markham. I'm the Director of External Affairs for the Nature Conservancy. The part of my job that's pertinent to our discussion today is that I work on state and federal government relations. I've been in government relations for over 20 years now. And specifically, I have spent the last 7 years working on the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund and trying to get that passed. So that's going to be a topic of conversation today. So excited to be here.
Joe, tell us about yourself.
Well, I guess we're still in good morning mode, but good morning and glad to be here. Thank you, Lyle. I'm a lifelong Iowan, grew up loving the outdoors, went to Iowa State University in wildlife biology. Like many people, maybe started part of my career in government. So I was in Story County Conservation for 6 years. And I've been with Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation now for 26 years, been president 13 of those years. My main focus as president of INHF is, to serve Iowans, protect and restore Iowa's land, water, wildlife. And a big part of that has been, maybe since 2010, the vote to create the constitutional amendment for the Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. A lot of my efforts have been about seeing that funded, which we believe would serve all Iowans.
Thanks, Joe. Brad?
All right, I'll wrap up our panel introductions this morning. My name's Brad Friedoff. I am currently the Conservation Director for the Johnson County Conservation Board. I haven't been in the game quite as long as Joe, but I started in County Conservation Board work in 1997 in Pocahontas County in Northwest Iowa, and I've been down here in Johnson County for the last 20 plus years. I'm a lifelong Iowan, not quite as long as Chuck Grassley's been a senator for our state, but I've been here for a long time. I grew up on a farm in Northeast Iowa, and so it's always been my goal to see conservation and agriculture really collaborate together to provide the best landscape Iowans deserve. And so I am also excited to talk about fully funding the Outdoor Recreation and Conservation Trust Fund in the state of Iowa and seeing what that can do for all the Iowans if we get it fully funded.
We're going to get into some forward-looking things here, but I just think we ought to start with kind of that 2,000-foot view of why conservation practices and a deeper dive into our farm technology is important. So, Amber, you want to take that one?
Yeah. So I would say at the Nature Conservancy, we have a saying, and it is that nature unites us. And so I think that in these divisive times, it's always important for us to have a common goal to work toward. When I've talked to my neighbors or Iowans across the state, I think there are three main issues that continually come up that are at the forefront of Iowans' minds. Number one is water quality. Number two is the farm economy. And number three is flooding. And so the trust fund, the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund, could provide dollars to help resolve all three of those things through conservation. And so conservation practices help filter nitrates out of our water. They help put dollars in farmers' pockets to put practices on the ground that could benefit all of us. And lastly, they help protect our cities and farms from flooding. And so basically, conservation protects nature so nature can protect us. And so that's why conservation is just so important. And those are a few of the benefits that are at the forefront of Iowans' minds right now, and specifically why funding the trust would be so important.
Do we have an appetite for conservation? Joe, what do you think?
Well, I absolutely. And I think when you talk about it in the context of an appetite for conservation, I believe personally that all Iowans want Iowa to be as best as it can be. I'm a firm believer and we want the best ag land, we want the best conservation, we want the best quality of life, education, all those things. So I think so many times the narrative has been painted that it's either or. And just like flipping that script, agriculture and conservation should be synonymous. We should be taking care of the soil. We should be taking care of the land that really generates and drives our economy, but also is our own well-being. I believe there is an appetite. Some of the divide that maybe we're feeling is more in the how, and maybe some differences in how we get there. But I'll go back to the original. I think we all want Iowa to be healthy. Some look at it a little differently. There may be outliers, of course, that we could argue. I think we have to have the appetite for it, and we have to figure out how to get there together. And time is of the essence. It has to be as soon as possible. Start today.
I think we're going to circle around that outdoor recreation trust fund quite a bit in this discussion. And as instead of circling, I will hope we can really just put a spade into that thing and start digging through it. But I want to set something. A 2021 Farm Poll survey report coming out of Iowa State shows that 56% of the respondents agreed that the Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund should be funded. 12% said no. 32%, a third of the people, said they just didn't know. And so, but more than two-thirds of the people agreed with this statement. I believe that investing in natural resources and outdoor recreation can help the economy. And 63% said they agree with the idea of parks, trails, and other natural resources. In Johnson County, Brad, there's a pretty good system of trails and recreation areas. What's going on here with the fund, and how are you doing it in Johnson County without that kind of funding?
Well, we've been fortunate. We have had some local funding that has helped us do some of that. But I think all Iowans deserve that opportunity to get that kind of funding, right? We want to find common ground. We want to unite our urban and rural environments, provide those economic opportunities to flow out of our urban environments into our rural communities. where people really get a taste of what Iowa's all about, right? They want to come to our state and recreate, enjoy the Iowa nice that we all know. And we've already shown that annually we have events like Ragbri and other tourist attractions that bring people to Iowa. We want to enhance that. And we think these opportunities that could be created through the Conservation Trust Fund would allow the entire state of Iowa to do that, rather than just those few counties that are doing it with conservation bond funding, which is what's happening in places like Story, Lynn, Polk, and Johnson County.
When I was a reporter for the Gazette some years ago now, Johnson County, despite being a Democratic county, the Board of Supervisors was loath to pass a bond issue. They didn't want to do debt. But yet you've had bond issues in 2008 and 2024.
Yes.
How did that happen? What's going on there?
Look, the real thing is communication, boots on the ground, talking to the people that are in Iowa, right? Not letting pundits or political figures, letting the people talk on what they want. And that's what they were looking for. They were looking for opportunities to see growth in our communities, to see linkages between our rural communities and Iowa City, our larger metro areas. And so we've been able to put a lot of money into those trail networks between our communities. We've been able to buffer and purchase property that farmers have been fighting for years because they keep getting flooded on those lowland areas, but they want to see those be used for recreation. They see the value for hunting and fishing and people that are out there kayaking and canoeing down the Iowa River. So we've been able to acquire some of those properties. And this isn't, people think of it as a tax. This is an investment in our homes, in our where we call the environment we call Iowa, right? That's what we're doing, is investing back in our communities. I think we lost you there, Lyle.
I think you're on mute.
You did. I must have hit something. I apologize for that. Let's get into that trust fund. And I'm going to you, Amber, because you've got a legal degree, a law degree, and you've got some background in this with lobbying. What's going on with the trust fund? Why isn't it funded?
Well, in 2010, a constitutional amendment passed that created the trust fund. So it created this pot that money could be put in that could only be used for, protected things like natural resources and outdoor recreation. But just because we created the pot in 2010 doesn't mean that anything was going into it. So in order to fund that trust fund, we have to get a 3/8 of a penny sales tax increase in order to get that funding in there. So that would take a vote of the legislature to do. And so since 2010, we've been working hard to try to get that funded, but it's sat empty. So, at this point, Iowans have spoken very clearly, not only in their first vote in 2010, they passed that constitutional amendment at a 63% passage. But, the Nature Conservancy has done polling since then. We did polling in 2021 to gauge, hey, do Iowans still care about, funding the trust? Is this on their radar? And actually, the numbers have only increased every year. In 2021, 81% of Iowans said that they supported the creation of the trust fund, and 70% supported increasing the sales tax by 3/8 of a penny. So we know those numbers keep going up. And we actually also, the Nature Conservancy did polling in 2025 to find out what are the issues that Iowans most care about right now. And one of the things that polled highest was that they said that polluted rivers, lakes, and streams were, one of the issues of most serious concern for them. And we had numbers from 2017, so we could compare how much more important it is in 2025 than even 2017. And we found a 20-point increase in the concern that Iowans had. So, every year this issue is just getting more and more serious for Iowans and more at the forefront of their minds. And so I think, it's time to listen to what Iowans have told us and have voted on and move forward with funding the trust, because it could provide solutions for so many of the problems that Iowans are facing.
Well, it sounds as though there was kind of a hedge there to protect against any future tax increases, like sales tax increases, that would then, if you did that, you just couldn't do that to fund the state. You'd had to fund conservation, correct?
Correct.
Is that
So
right?
yeah, so if that sales tax increases, the first 3/8 of a penny would go and could only be used for natural resources and outdoor recreation. So there were constitutional parameters on what that funding could be used for. Now, that's the broader umbrella of what that funding can be used for. But in statutes, there are specific details under that umbrella for how that money could be spent. And that's called the trust fund formula. So I say, the constitutional amendment, and if we get the sales tax passed, you're turning the faucet of funding on. But the temperature of that water, so specifically where it goes, the formula dictates that, and that's spelled out in the Iowa statute.
Joe, what type of things are the Iowa Heritage Foundation doing as you look at trying to get people to fund the trust fund? Any kind of lobbying on your end, or are you more on the giving out grants and just ignoring what government's doing?
No, as a statewide land trust, we're very active in on the ground implementation of all sorts of conservation, whether that's soil conservation, outdoor recreation, trails, public land, things like that. So our involvement with the trust fund goes back really to 2008 when we did the study around the needs for the state. So if you remember the flood of 08, I'm sure all of us do who were in Iowa at the time, that was a real big spark to say, what does Iowa need? And what does Iowa need at that time? And so when we created the trust fund and it went to the voters, it was very clear that we had specific needs in Iowa. And that was a full balance, whether it was soil conservation for farmers, whether it was outdoor recreation through trails, lake restoration, funding of REAP, all of those things were important to Iowa. No part, in my opinion, was left out. Everyone benefited in every county, in every sector of Iowa. So ever since that time, we've been advocating and lobbying and getting people to speak up on how important this trust fund was. I think the other thing to keep in mind, Lyle, that this is very accountable. The Iowa DNR has to report to the legislature every year how that money is spent, where it goes. They've been reporting ever since then. They've been reporting that it's zero because it hasn't been funded, but it's very accountable. The other side of this is that the funding is sustainable and reliable. Many of the parts of the formula that Amber referenced already exist. REAP already exists. The state rec trails already exist. Many of these things are already there and have been functioning very well. They just haven't been funded at the level that we believe Iowans need. But we're very active on both sides of it, the implementation and hopefully the funding, which should come soon.
I'm going to see if I understand this correctly.
Yeah.
Is the public policy issue how much funding, or is the public policy issue funding?
It's a little of both. Ultimately, it's how much. I think many of these things have been funded. So I'll give you an example. REAP, Resource Enhancement and Protection, is authorized at $20 million a year. That's in code. It has averaged $12 million a year in its over 35 years of existence. So it isn't that there isn't some funding, it's that we just feel it needs to be more. And we created a trust fund collectively, Iowans, that addresses that. It's sustainable and reliable. Take trails for an example. The average has been 1 to 1.5 million a year. We know the unmet needs of trails around the state far exceed that, 6, 8, 10 million a year. So while there's funding, we think that should be higher.
All right, that flood is out of sight, out of mind for many. Not necessarily the 2008 flood is for those of us who live in eastern Iowa. Johnson County in particular got hammered because of its Coralville Lake situation and the dam overflowing. Over on the west side, the Missouri River, they have a more recent experience. And then we have local experiences. Do you need an immediate disaster to get some some kind of action on this? I mean, am I being too dark about this, Brad?
No, I think you're hit the nail on the head here, Lyle. I don't think we want to wait for the next natural disaster, and there is always another natural disaster on the forefront. I think what this program would allow us to do, this Outdoor Recreation and Natural Resource Conservation Trust Fund, would allow us to be better prepared for that next natural disaster, right? When we look at these things, you've already talked about it. This was passed in 2010. People are starting to forget. We forget about the 1993 floods. We forget about the 2008 floods, but they're going to be here again. And so we need to bring that those thoughts back to people's forefront. And I think now is the best time possible to enact and fund the Outdoor Recreation and Natural Resource Trust Fund, because I look at the economic status the state of Iowa is in right now. We are seeing record yields. We're seeing markets that aren't being opened for Iowa farmers. And I think we're at a place where we need to consider, is that ag technology that allows us to grow so much more per acre on the landscape? Have we grown to a place where we need to return some of this land back into conservation practices? And how do we do that? We fund those farmers to put these conservation practices back on their landscape. And this fund does that, right? Not only we talk about trails, we talk about parks, but this is allowing the Iowans who manage and are stewards of our land to put conservation practices back on their own land. And those conservation practices, those are the things, Lyle, that are going to keep us from the next flood, right? They're going to store and infiltrate that water. And let's talk about that infiltration. Why is that so important now more than ever? Well, we've already had ethanol plants that have a huge demand on our aquifer systems. We are now seeing data centers wanting to move to the state of Iowa. And all of these systems are going to put huge demands on the quantity of water that the state of Iowa can provide. How do we ensure that we have adequate supplies of water for these systems and for our agricultural system across the state of Iowa? We make sure we have wetlands. We make sure that we buffer rivers and streams. We allow farmers to do practices on their own land that will infiltrate that water instead of running it off through a drainage ditch or a creek. And so these are the exact mechanisms that you're talking about that will help prepare us for that next natural disaster that is just off that, over the horizon that we all fear. And so I would be very much appreciative of a proactive approach rather than reactive. Reactive is very hard to work on, and this old guy can't take much more of that. Let's be prepared for it so it makes it a little more easy when that next one does show up on the horizon.
Amber, are we just waiting for it to happen, or have we forgotten what the floods were like?
Yeah, we use a term called pre-disaster mitigation. The reality is, if we can spend, for every dollar we spend, getting ahead of something, putting a wetland in place to protect the farms and cities downstream, you're going to save, 10 times what it costs to do it in advance from what you're going to spend on cleanup after the fact. We have 80 years of data that show us that the rate of flooding over those 80 years has doubled. We know that weather patterns are changing and that these types of disasters are only going to occur more frequently. So let's spend less money on the front end preventing the damage that they cause than we would spend cleaning it up on the back end. I think there's a misconception that we don't want to use tax dollars maybe on these conservation practices because they cost money. But the reality is they are saving us in the long term a whole lot of money, because let's get out in front of it.
Some of the complaints during the flood of 2008 was that cities have paved, and we've paved all of these different spots in small towns. But what you're talking about is actually land use practices. What's the balance there between us paving our landscape and what we're doing with our farm fields when it comes to flooding? Joe, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think overwhelmingly, when you look at Iowa's landscape, 36 million acres, obviously all parts of that are important, whether you look at the Walmart parking lot or city streets. I think, but overwhelmingly, our landscape is still soil, natural land in some, whether it's ag fields or other lands. And so I think it's all hands on deck. Obviously, locally, that pavement is going to have a huge impact. But when you look at the statewide landscape coming down, let's say the Cedar River or the Iowa River in Iowa City or the Des Moines River, there's no question where that water is coming from. And I think to Amber's point, what can we do ahead of time? We know there's going to be spikes. We know there's going to be 6, 7, 8, 10-inch rains. It's happening. And so what are we doing on the landscape to mitigate that ahead of time? I kind of look at these things when I hear natural disaster. Some of this we know can be prevented or at least be mitigated. And so are we actively looking ahead, or are we going to just think, well, maybe that won't happen. We'll wish that these things won't happen. History's telling us it's going to happen, and what are we going to do about it? I think it's all of the above. Urban has to be a big part of it. Rural has to be a big part of it. We can't ignore one part of it and expect the outcome to be different.
We lost you again, Lyle.
Thank you. Joe, anything, excuse me, not Joe, Brad, anything to add on that, especially on this idea of?
No, I think Amber and Joe have said very well what needs to be said on that. I think adding these conservation practices across our landscape, I grew up in the 80s when we had the farm crisis and when things were talked about like value added ag. How could we help those farmers get more money from the land that they were paying taxes on and they were stewards of? And I think these conservation practices, that's that investment that we can help these farmers make. It also helps bring the economies of these small rural towns back, right? I grew up in the heyday of pheasant hunting in the state of Iowa, and I loved to go down to the local taverns where everybody was meeting for a breakfast before the big hunt. And there was a huge influx of money that came from out of state to those communities. And I think by having farmers do just a little more conservation practices, and we are investing in those farms, right? These guys, they're paying taxes on that land. They shouldn't be doing it for free. But this makes all Iowans assist with those land preservation and that stewardship practices. And it also brings economic opportunities for those small towns that are in those businesses, because that habitat that those farmers are putting in as conservation practices will attract wildlife, will attract insects. And that brings people to your community. And that's what we want. We want all of rural Iowa and urban Iowa to be successful. And these are the opportunities we can't let pass us by.
What are those practices? What would be some practices that farmers could do, not just setting aside marshlands or wetlands, but give us a kind of a list, all three of you, give us your best ideas on that. Brad, you can start.
Well, I think providing buffer strips along streams and rivers is great work. I think restoring terraces that we have built across the state of Iowa and that have degraded over the years. I think methods to intercept tile water and treat it before it leaves the landscape and enters our rivers and streams. Those are all great practices that can be implemented. And there are lists and lists practices that Iowa State Extension, other farm ag communities out there have studied and researched, and we know the results of those, and we just have to get funding to implement them. I'll let Joe and Amber jump in if they have any other suggestions on those practices.
Yeah, Amber?
Yeah. So I think Brad did a great job of listing off, a lot of these practices. And I think people need to realize just how effective these practices are, not only for flood control, but also water quality. So, for example, a wetland can remove up to 90% of the nitrates in the water. They're just natural solutions are so beneficial and cost effective. But I also want to add that the benefits of these natural solutions aren't just to like sort of the neighbors or the environment, but they also have direct economic benefits to farmers. And I really want to highlight that point because sometimes I think there's a picture painted that maybe it's a burden, but in fact, sometimes it makes all the economic sense in the world for a farmer to put a practice on the ground. And I'll just give an example. I had a farmer that I just visited the other day, and he laid out on 1 acre of land, after the high input costs that we're currently facing and the low commodity prices, he had a net profit of $175 on that acre. If he enrolled that same acre that was low CSR into CRP, which is essentially like habitat for its grassland, that he could get a payment of $285 an acre. So he can actually make more money retiring that land that's not high productivity, that's actually, with the high input costs and the low commodity prices, makes him more money to put it into a conservation practice. And then all his neighbors, Iowans, get the benefit of the water that it's going to protect. They get the benefit of the outdoor recreation that it will create because now there's habitat for pheasants to be in. So there's environmental benefits, but there's huge economic benefits as well to putting these practices in place.
Joe, you get the benefit of being the third person to add anything.
Well, the benefit of trying to fill in I would frame this maybe a little differently. When I think about agriculture, I think sometimes in Iowa, we automatically think ag and it's synonymous with corn and beans. And I think if we back out a little bit and start thinking about agriculture and kind of the holistic view. So it may be not an either or. It may be that we have corn and beans, but we also have very viable pastures. We have hay ground. We might have ways to repurpose some of that agriculture that then serves water quality and water quantity differently. As an example, we know that there's about 300,000 to 400,000 acres of row crop in the 2-year floodplain in Iowa. If we just repurpose that ag as, let's say, hay ground or maybe pasture, we might be able to still be productive, make a living off that land, but serve the water a little differently. So I think that's kind of the first step. I think the other side of this is we have to start thinking about who's really owning the land and who's operating the land. Much of our land is not the owner and the operator. About 50% of the land is owned by one and operated by another. So you also have this tension between the tenant and the landowner, and to try to bring that together so people are farming the land as if they owned it, that they're investing in the land for themselves as much as they are for the landowner. Then you start layering in all these practices that Brad and Amber mentioned. We need to equip our landowners and the tenants with all the tools available to serve all of Iowa. So there has to be ways that we can partner. So thinking about stacked benefits, building a wetland as maybe instead of a bioreactor, or bioreactors at the right place. Every farm is going to be a little different. And I think if we fund the Natural Resource and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund, then we equip all Iowans, all communities, all counties with the tools that they need to meet the water quality needs, water quantity needs, outdoor recreation needs. I don't want to frame it as the panacea or the silver bullet, but it is very, very important that we have sustainable and reliable funding to meet these needs when they arise. If we try to fix them after the fact, or we try to find the funding retroactively, it's very difficult. The other side of it is then we can't do planning. If you don't know the funding that's coming, how can we make reasonable plans to set ourselves up for the long term if we're constantly trying to find unreliable funding and unsustainable funding?
Well, how do public policy shifts affect the idea of doing effective land management? Joe's a smiling, so pitch right in.
Well, and I think that's been part of the problem, is that the narrative has been painted somehow urban-rural divide or us against them. And I just think that's such a false narrative. You heard from these three panels, I think if you listen to every farmer, people, we all are interconnected, urban and rural. So I think the public policy has to be thinking about the bigger picture. How can we set ourselves up for success? One, through funding, but also kind of removing some of this stigma that has pit us against each other. Think about the water quality issues that affect some of our urban areas. We're all connected to that water. And so we've got to figure this out and I think remove the false narrative that somehow urban dwellers are against the rural and vice versa. That's how I would first address it. And then I just think the policies have to equip us with the funding so we can do long-term planning.
But Brad, I'm going to toss it to you. We have these 4-year election cycles, and so we have to deal with that. And that's not anything new. It's not 2020 and 2024. It's been, the history of whenever we finally started doing land management. How do you deal with those 4-year cycles, Brad?
We've always been doing land management. Everybody that's been on this planet has been a land manager of some type, different means. I think one of the big problems with these policies and getting them on the landscape is there has to be a payback to those landowners, right? We have to find ways to get over that. And right now, I would say politically in the world, at least in the United States, there's a real divide. The people that are on the land, we're tired of hearing one side or the other. We want solutions on the land. And so these are investments, right? These aren't regulations. When we talk about this isn't coming down and saying, well, we're mandating you to do this. No, this is an incentive for you to do it. There are funds that are with it. And I think you would find a lot of the owners of Iowa's land would happily take those funds to invest in their land, right? You talked a little bit earlier about technology. We have some of the best agricultural technology in the world in the state of Iowa. Seed production and genetics are better than they've ever been. But yet in my lifetime, I've seen us continue to expand the number of acres we farm, where, as Joe mentioned, maybe we need to repurpose some of that land and take it out of what we think of as traditional row crop production. I know farmers in Kentucky and Arkansas are looking at the soybean markets, and they're saying maybe there's a new crop on the horizon. Maybe canola is the product I'm going to be growing. I don't know where we're going to go with crop production in the state of Iowa, but we are going to be producing crops of some kind. And so to do these conservation practices, this is an investment in that land that will prepare our future generations to continue our agricultural production on the landscape.
In a previous panel discussion here for Iowa Ideas, it was earlier this morning, there were farmers talking about alternative crops and how developing them for themselves was helping them be sustainable, earn a good income, and also help produce things such as oats, raising oats for a new oat milling plant in Albert Lea, Minnesota, where the farmer benefits, the Albert Lea benefits, and your soil is doing something different than just growing corn and soybeans. I grew up in Northeast Iowa, in Clayton County and Chickasaw County. When I was in Clayton County, we would go over to Spook Cave. I don't know if any of you is aware of Spook Cave. And my friends and I would take a glass and go to the spring spouting out of the side of the hill. We would fill our glass with water and drink it because it was fresh spring water. Amber, should I do that today?
That may be a little risky depending on, if there's a rain before, if there's a cow upstream. But honestly, we used to take trips to Spook Cave. I'm from Northeast Iowa as well, Riceville, and every school would take a trip to Spook Cave as their class field trip. And so I know Spook Cave very well. But I would say this, kind of also going back to the conversation around, farmers and, when we had a lot of our subcommittee hearings on funding the trust and on Iowa over the last several years, farmers would show up and a lot of them would talk about all the conservation practices they're doing right now on their farms, they're working very hard to, conserve their own land. I mean, that's their number one resource. They want to conserve it. But I think what's very difficult, and what you would hear a lot of them say is, hey, you know what? I'm paying for all these conservation practices on the farm. I don't get any help. I'm doing the best I can. And what I think is, if we want to ensure that, we have good water quality for all Iowans, it's an all Iowan problem. And we need to support those farmers. And the way that we do that is through cost share programs for the state, technical assistance, and those programs need to be funded. And the way to fund them at a scope and scale that will really make a difference is through funding the Natural Resources and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. We know that potentially on a yearly basis, we could get $260 million a year to go toward these issues, 60% of which could be used specifically for water quality. So, we have this opportunity to really bring in dollars that could make a difference, that could help farmers and help them pay for those practices on the ground, especially in a time when the farm economy is really struggling. Commodity prices are low. We could bring those resources to those farmers, and then all Iowans would benefit. So you could be reassured that if you took a drink out of, the water at Spook Cave, that you wouldn't get sick afterwards.
But we do have some water quality issues, and there are groups who are working on that. Up in Northeast Iowa, there still is a University of Northern Iowa a while ago was studying the instances of lead in the groundwater up there because of lead mining that had been going on, and we have farm runoff that we worry about. My son-in-law tells me I could take a drink out of a tiling pipe, and I'm pretty sure that I couldn't. But we have all of these issues, and a lot of it is related to farmers trying to make sure that they maximize their profits. And so you hit a good point there, Amber, when it comes to farmers are paying for it. And I do believe we're continually circling around the Iowa Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund in Iowa. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. I have a few topics, though, I want to touch on. Climate change. Do farm industries believe that climate change is happening? Are they preparing for climate change? And I'm thinking of corn producers, soybean producers, the hog, the pork industry, the cattle industry. Who can speak about that? Brad, you're on, and so now you pulled my trick.
I pulled your trick there.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm having home week edition here. I was a Howard County, so we'll connect Chickasaw and Mitchell counties together here. But yes, I think these are things that we can find solutions to. Those we didn't talk about climate as a farm kid, right? You went down and you had dinner at the local spot, and it was, what's the weather doing? And so I do believe that farmers do understand that weather patterns are changing, right? We're getting drought periods, extended drought periods in the state of Iowa. We are getting wet periods, and when it's a wet period, it all comes at once. We witnessed that up in Clay County and the Okobojies with inundations of large amounts of water. And so I think farmers are trying to make those adaptations, but it's difficult for them as well because there are models, there are networks and systems that exist, and it costs money to change those systems. A lot of people say, well, why don't we get out of corn and soybeans? I said, well, one of those combines cost $1.5 million to harvest that corn, right? They're not going to simply switch away from that. And so we have to build the networks, the markets for these farmers to transition to something else and allow them to be prepared for climate impacts, right? Whether we get hotter and drier. I think our universities, land-grant colleges are studying that. We're trying to stay aware of the best crop production. We're trying to improve genetics on those crops we do have so they can withstand dry periods and wet periods. But again, I think it takes all of us, and it's going to take a lot of work to make a monumental shift in agricultural production. Can it be done? Yes. I've witnessed it as a kid, going from rotational crops where you had corn, soybeans, alfalfa. You grew every species of livestock on the farm, cows, chickens, pigs. And now everything has become very specialized. And so I think we could see a resurgence of that regenerative ag where we go to more diversity. This year we saw massive impacts on our yields due to that southern rust that came into the state of Iowa. And so are we prepared for that? I don't know, but the more diverse markets those farmers have and the more diversity they have on the farm, the more resilient they're going to be.
Are inexpensive technologies available at the hands of farmers to deal with this?
Expensive technologies?
Inexpensive.
Oh, inexpensive technologies. Well, I think the state of Iowa, we've provided a lot of great resources to them. The Iowa Flood Center. I think more and more data is coming in faster than ever. How do they engage that or implement into their systems? That I don't know. I'm not currently an ag economist, but I think it can be done because I think those, as we discussed, those investments can pay big dividends.
Here's speaking of the economy, here's a story that a former student of mine wrote when he was at Channel 2 KGAN in Cedar Rapids. Iowa farmers stand to lose up to $356 million in future conservation funding through 2013, following a freeze on Inflation Reduction Act payments by the Trump administration. We're back to that 4-year cycle again. How do you deal with something like that? You're the foundation, Joe. What can farmers do when something like that happens?
Well, it's probably a little bit out of my expertise, but I think I would frame it as this. We've got to be dealing with policy, not politics. And when we're tied to pendulum politics, where 3 years ago we were writing grants with one purpose, and now you have to script language out of that grant and go to a different side. I think the agricultural producers, farmers, are in that same sort of pendulum, that they were asked to do climate smart ag just 2 years ago, and now they're finding themselves as climate smart ag as a poison pill. And so how can anyone make long-term decisions with what I would consider this political whiplash? That is very challenging to the farmers. Us as an organization, as a land trust, as conservation, we're absolutely not anti-farmer or farming. We're trying to figure out on the same landscape, how do we do the work we're here to do in concert with our neighbors? So I think that's the real issue, is that we're in politics whiplash right now. And I can only empathize with all of those trying to navigate a 1 and 2 year plan or a 5 and a 10-year plan, not knowing even what the next 6 to 12 months brings. So I don't have an answer to the economy side of it, but I do know that that has been very challenging for all of us, and farmers notwithstanding.
And Amber, it's going to come your way, because although I do believe that the loss of $350 million in conservation funds would be difficult for each of you to digest, the question more is just this whiplash thing, right? How do you, the planning, and then you have a 4-year thing, and it could change again in 3 years. What's a farmer to do, especially if you have to invest a lot of money in conservation?
Yeah, obviously certainty, helps everyone. But I would say this, with the Inflation Reduction Act, we had about $14 billion of unspent funding that in the budget resolution, they actually put into the baseline of the Farm Bill in the conservation title. So we actually increased the baseline of the conservation title of the Farm Bill by $14 billion. I'm actually going to Washington, D.C. with the Nature Conservancy and all our trustees next week to ensure that Congress maintains that $14 billion increase in that baseline funding, because that will be huge for Iowans and conservation to actually increase the amount of funding in the baseline of the Farm Bill for conservation. So important. So what I would say is, like, they are making efforts that, you know, even though in the Inflation Reduction Act dollars didn't get spent or they got pulled back, at least that $14 billion actually got rolled forward into that baseline, and we have the potential to actually increase the amount of conservation funding we have.
How intense is the lobbying in DC?
Well, we're in a government shutdown right now, so I'm sure things are a little slower. We'll see when we get out there on Monday, but you know, Farm Bill is important to everyone, and we need to have it move forward. The Farm Bill is the single largest source of conservation funding in the nation. So if we don't get a Farm Bill and a strong conservation title in the Farm Bill, it could be highly detrimental to Iowa farmers, to Iowa conservationists, to all Iowans. You know, conservation affects all our water. It affects flooding. You know, it affects our farm economy. So we need to get that done.
Would it be reasonable to think that consumers should help bear the cost in increased food prices in order to support farmers who do conservation practices? Brad.
Yeah, I'll jump on that one. Yes, I think the Earl Butts generation here in the state of Iowa, we produce cheap food and we produce a lot of it. That was the mantra we had in the state of Iowa. And so we're paying much lower food costs than anywhere in the world, right? And so I think we don't grasp the true cost of the food that's being produced on our landscape. And now we need to adjust back to what it really does cost. I'm concerned with, you know, we may lose some of the markets here in the United States. If Argentina and Brazil grab some of these big markets, will soybeans be a crop that continues to be grown in the state of Iowa? And if it isn't, what takes its place? And what do we use for those rotational crop production fields? And so there's a lot of unknowns out there. We kind of talked about that with the politics of every 4 years. But that's the scary part for those landowners out there right now is how do we prepare for this future with those changes coming?
And while we're talking about cost and good land management, is organic farming economical? Can it be sustainable and help a farmer earn an income and also give people food at a reasonable price? Joe, I'm going to pick on you on that one there.
Well, I mean, I think the answer is yes. It's been proven. There's a lot of people switching to organic. I think the technology on how to farm organically is constantly changing. There are people in Kossuth County farming thousands of acres organically. So there's no question. Could it be scaled up to be 24 million acres? I think that might take a while. But I think to the earlier question, I think when you talk about us paying the right price for food, we're paying for it one way or another. You know, when we're either paying to clean the water at the water plant, we're paying for the food, or we're paying for it in our health. I mean, there's always going to be a cost. And in kind of thinking about it in an economic standpoint, where is that burden falling? And so to place it all on the farmer that they have to clean the water probably isn't fair. And nor is it fair that we have to clean the water at the other end. So I think finding that balance on the land. What I would say is it's much cheaper for everyone to clean the water up in the watershed through wetlands and other practices than it would be down at the water treatment plant. Doesn't matter what city you're in, it's always going to be cheaper to clean it up in the watershed before it gets down to the tap. I think those other practices on whether it's organic or it's regenerative farming or sustainable farming, all those things have to factor into it. And I think they're all achievable. And we should collectively figure out how to maximize the product and minimize the cost of production and environmental cleanup.
Well, if you take care of the cleanup at the watershed, then you're benefiting even more than the tap. You're benefiting much more.
Absolutely. We at INHF, we think about those stacked benefits. For every dollar we spend, what is our return on that? Are we getting outdoor recreation? Are we getting clean water, wildlife habitat, healthy food, healthy people? It's only common sense that you would stack the most benefits you could for that $1 spent. And that's how we should be approaching it.
And I think Joe mentioned a great point there is health, right? Iowa was one of the few states with our cancer rates still climbing. And so those markets, the demand for organics, the demand for less treatment, until we identify what is causing these increased cancer rates, I think the consumer is going to be a little more cautious, and that may open up some more of those markets. But these conservation practices, as Joe mentioned, they really have a positive impact on our health as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would add to that, I think too, there's a way to let the consumer decide as well, because we've gotten really creative, and I think you saw this with organic markets to begin with. Products are labeled organic, or now they're even labeled sustainably grown, and you may pay a premium for those, but it's then, if you have the ability to pay more because you care if something's been sustainably grown or organically grown, then you're willing to pay that premium. So even labeling could be a way to really help move that forward, and like the consumer choose if they want to support that and pay for those things on the back end.
All right, we're going to run low on our time here real quickly. Amber, what's the nature of Conservancy doing right now? You mentioned you're going to DC on Monday. What else is up your sleeve to try to deal with land management issues?
Yeah, we are working on the state and federal level. Like I said, we're going to DC all next week. Also working with a lot of different organizations, including with Joe, with County Conservation, with a whole coalition of organizations trying to fund the trust. So we're really working on ramping up our grassroots efforts right now, because what we realize is, we just had a conversation yesterday or last week that a lot of the legislators who are in office right now weren't even old enough to vote when the I Will first passed. And so we're realizing that we need to do a re-education campaign to say, hey, you know what? This is still here. This is still a viable solution to the problems that Iowans are facing. Let's move it forward.
Joe, what's going on with the Iowa Heritage Foundation next up?
Well, I think similar to Amber, we're absolutely interested in funding the trust, the Natural Resource and Outdoor Recreation Trust Fund. If you go back to 2010, had it been funded even 1 year later, we would have seen $2 billion in additional funds that could have been going to all of the problems we've talked about, whether it's water quality, soil conservation, some to farmers, some to trails. It would have been transformational. We are now a topic of discussion nationwide because of cancer, because of water quality concerns. I think had we funded it back then, we would have been a talk of the nation, because we were proactive and preemptive in funding the things that we saw as priorities. So I think we absolutely have to figure out how to fund that. We're working at day and night on figuring out how to educate Iowans to bring this back to the forefront, that we have a part of the solution right in front of us. We have the funding solution in front of us. The other thing we're just working on is quality of life. We know that Iowans want the best of everything, whether it's education, agriculture, but also Iowans deserve and want a quality of life that would bring in and retain our workforce development. So all of those things are factored in. And so we're kind of looking at everything at all the time. And the trust fund is obviously central to that.
And Brad, you're going to be kind of cut short here. I apologize for that. We're within less than a minute, but
yeah, no problem. I like to wrap things up quick. What we're going to continue to work on here is protect those natural resource systems that the public wants here in Johnson County. We're going to protect those for the wildlife habitat and all the ecological services those systems provide us, right? And we're going to continue to educate and communicate with the public out there about things like the Outdoor Trust Fund, outdoor Outdoor Recreation and Natural Resource Trust Fund is important for the entire state of Iowa. And so we will continue that campaign as well as we move forward.
All right. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for ITC, the sponsor. 1 o'clock, keynote Doug Getch. I'm Lyle Muller. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thank you.